Hello everyone, and welcome back. Have you ever felt like there is more to perception than what your eyes can see? Many ancient cultures believed so. They spoke of something beyond vision, a hidden sense, often called the third eye. Today, we will explore where that idea comes from and why it continues to fascinate both mystics and scientists alike. In Eastern philosophy, especially within Hinduism and Buddhism, the third eye is known as the Ajna chakra, the center of intuition. It is said to rest between the eyebrows, symbolizing insight that transcends ordinary sight. To open this eye means awakening an inner clarity, seeing truth not through the lens of logic, but through awareness itself. For thousands of years, monks, yogis, and spiritual seekers have described this as a kind of inner vision, one that reveals not the physical world but the nature of the self. Unlike what we might imagine, the third eye is not about supernatural powers or glowing energy. It is more about perception turned inward. Where our physical eyes look outward, the third eye looks inward toward consciousness, memory, and understanding. Through meditation or mindfulness, many describe moments of deep stillness where this sense of inner seeing seems to awaken. Some call it intuition, others call it enlightenment. But, in essence, it is a moment when thought grows quiet and awareness expands. Modern thinkers sometimes connect the idea of the third eye with the pineal gland, a tiny organ in the center of the brain that regulates sleep cycles. While this connection is symbolic, it shows how the myth of an inner eye still finds resonance in modern science. The metaphor remains powerful, a reminder that human perception is not limited to what is visible. It includes what we feel, imagine, and understand on a deeper level. So tonight, as we explore the mysteries of the mind, let us start with this question. What if the third eye is not something mystical to be opened, but a part of us that has always been awake, quietly waiting to be noticed? The idea of the third eye sits at the crossroads between spiritual symbolism and physical reality. In ancient traditions, it was not meant to describe a literal organ that could see hidden dimensions, but rather a doorway to deeper consciousness. Yet over time, people began to wonder, what if this eye was real in some biological way? Could it exist inside us, unnoticed? Spiritually, the third eye represents awareness beyond perception. It is about understanding the unseen patterns that shape our thoughts, emotions, and intuition. In Hinduism, it is associated with Lord Shiva, a symbol of destruction and rebirth, of seeing beyond illusion. In Buddhism, it reflects the insight gained through mindfulness, when one sees things as they truly are, without judgment or attachment. In both views, the third eye is not a supernatural gift, but a discipline of attention. The ability to see truth where others see only surface. Physically, however, some have linked the third eye to the pineal gland, a small pine cone-shaped structure near the center of the brain. Early philosophers like René Descartes called it the seat of the soul, imagining it as the bridge between body and spirit. Today, we know it regulates melatonin, a hormone that governs sleep and circadian rhythms, not visions or psychic abilities. Still, the coincidence of its location and symbolic meaning keeps the mystery alive. This overlap between spirit and biology captures something timeless: our desire to find meaning in the body's hidden structures, to believe that mind and matter might meet somewhere deep within. Whether real or metaphorical, the third eye continues to invite curiosity, not because it promises superhuman sight, but because it points to something we all sense quietly, that awareness itself might be our greatest instrument of vision. So perhaps the true question is not where the third eye is, but how we choose to see. Maybe it is not a hidden organ waiting to be found, but a way of noticing the world, one that begins when we stop looking outward and start observing within. Among all the theories surrounding the third eye, the pineal gland has captured the most scientific curiosity. Tucked deep in the center of the brain, this tiny organ no larger than a grain of rice has long been the focus of both philosophical speculation and modern research. Its position, right between the two hemispheres, seems almost symbolic, the meeting point between logic and intuition, between what we know and what we sense. The pineal gland's main function is clear. It regulates our sleep-wake cycle by producing melatonin, a hormone that responds to light and darkness. In essence, it helps the body recognize time, syncing us to the rhythm of day and night. But what made it so fascinating to philosophers and mystics was not its biological role, but the mystery of its placement and structure. In some lower vertebrates, this gland actually has photoreceptor cells, meaning it can detect light in a primitive way. Early thinkers wondered if, at some point in evolution, humans once had an inner light-sensitive organ that became symbolic of insight. It was René Descartes who famously called the pineal gland the seat of the soul, imagining it as the bridge between mind and matter, where thoughts might influence the body and vice versa. Modern neuroscience, however, sees no evidence that the gland plays such a role. It is a powerful hormonal regulator, yes, but not a doorway to other dimensions. Still, the poetic overlap lingers. The pineal gland, small and hidden, continues to mirror the myth of the third eye, something invisible yet vital, biological yet mysterious. Even if science strips away the supernatural layers, the symbolism remains deeply human. We are creatures who want to believe that there is a light inside us, not just neurons firing, but something more. Maybe that is why the pineal gland keeps resurfacing in conversations about consciousness. Not because it is a literal third eye, but because it reminds us of the delicate border between body and soul, the place where biology ends and awareness begins. If the third eye is a symbol of inner vision, then extrasensory perception, or ESP, represents its outward expression, the idea that human awareness can reach beyond the limits of the five senses. ESP covers phenomena like telepathy, mind-to-mind, communication, clairvoyance, seeing distant events, and precognition, knowing the future before it unfolds. For centuries, people have told stories of intuition so strong it defied explanation: a mother sensing her child is in danger, a soldier ducking just before a bullet passes by, a dream predicting a tragedy. These stories live at the edge between coincidence and mystery. Scientists began studying ESP seriously in the early prespo 20th century, hoping to test such claims under controlled conditions. One of the most famous figures in this field was J. B. Rhine, a psychologist at Duke University, who used cards with symbols, stars, waves, circles to measure psychic guessing. Some participants scored above chance, sparking excitement about possible hidden abilities. But when experiments were repeated elsewhere, the results did not hold up. The mystery stayed alive, but the proof remained elusive. ESP also gained attention during the Cold War, when both American and Soviet researchers reportedly explored remote viewing, the supposed ability to visualize hidden targets or locations. Governments poured money into secret programs, blurring the line between science and spycraft. Still, after decades of study, there was no consistent evidence that ESP worked better than probability alone. For many psychologists, what people call ESP might simply be pattern recognition at a subconscious level. Our brains constantly absorb tiny cues, tone, micro-expressions, changes in rhythm, then stitch them into gut feelings. Sometimes those instincts feel prophetic, when really they are the mind's quiet math at work. So whether you see ESP as science waiting to be proven, or as a reflection of how deeply intuitive the human mind can be, one truth remains. We are drawn to the idea that awareness could reach further than the visible. Perhaps the real power of ESP is not in seeing the unseen, but in learning how much our own perception still hides from us. The scientific exploration of ESP has always balanced between fascination and frustration. That researchers wanted to know, could the human mind truly detect information without using the senses? To test this, psychologists developed structured experiments, none more famous than the Ganzfeld test. In this setup, participants would sit in a soundproof room with soft red light and halved ping-pong balls over their eyes, hearing only white noise. The goal was to quiet external stimuli, creating a state where any psychic signal could, in theory, come through more clearly. A sender in another room would focus on an image or video, while the receiver described whatever impressions came to mind. If the receiver's responses matched the sender's target more often than chance would allow, it might suggest ESP. Early studies in the 1,980 seconds seemed promising. Some participants scored just high enough to raise eyebrows, but as more labs tried to replicate the findings, results began to flatten. What looked extraordinary at first started to resemble statistical noise. Part of the challenge lies in the very nature of ESP research. It is almost impossible to design an experiment that rules out subtle cues, biases, or chance patterns. Even a small change in wording or expectation can influence results. Critics argue that many studies suffer from confirmation bias, the tendency to see patterns that fit one's hopes. Others suggest that if ESP existed, it should appear clearly across large populations, not just in small, inconsistent samples. Still, the idea refuses to die. Each generation of researchers tweaks the methods, hoping that better controls or technology might reveal what earlier tests missed. And while no experiment has produced irrefutable evidence, the persistence itself says something. It shows how deeply we want to believe the mind might stretch beyond its limits, that intuition could one day be measurable. That mystery might still hide in the margins of science. In the end, the studies do not just test psychic powers. They test our own longing to understand consciousness, the oldest, most elusive phenomenon we know. Despite decades of curiosity and countless experiments, no solid scientific evidence has ever confirmed the existence of extrasensory perception. The data collected so far hover around statistical chance with no consistent or repeatable results. In science, repeatability is everything. If a phenomenon can't be reliably reproduced under the same conditions, it is considered anecdotal, not factual. That is where ESP continues to falter. Major reviews and meta-analyses have looked at hundreds of experiments, from telepathy trials to remote viewing studies. Each time, researchers found the same pattern: small, erratic effects that disappear when methods tighten or controls improve. What seems paranormal under loose observation tends to fade under stricter scrutiny. Even scientists once hopeful about ESP, like J.B. Rhine himself, eventually admitted that results were too inconsistent to call conclusive. This does not necessarily mean people are faking their experiences. More often, it points to human perception's fallibility. Our brains are meaning-making machines, designed to connect dots even when no pattern exists. When an intuition turns out right, a phone rings. Just as we think of someone, it feels magical. We forget the hundreds of times it did not. Psychologists call this selective memory, remembering hits, ignoring misses. Over time, those coincidences build a story we start to believe. Skeptics also argue that many psychic experiences can be explained by subtle, unconscious processing. Our minds constantly gather micro details: posture, tone, environment, even scent. These tiny cues add up, allowing a person to make accurate guesses that seem unexplainable. What feels like telepathy might just be intuition, sharpened by attention. For the scientific community, this distinction matters. ESP as a measurable force has not been proven, but intuition as a real psychological process absolutely has. The desire to label that intuition supernatural says more about human wonder than about evidence. In short, science has not closed the door on mystery. It is simply keeping it honest. What can't yet be measured is not dismissed as impossible. It is placed gently in the realm of the unknown, waiting for better tools, better data, and perhaps better questions. If the evidence for ESP remains uncertain, psychology offers a more grounded explanation, one that is no less fascinating. What people call extrasensory perception might actually be the subconscious mind at work, processing information faster and deeper than we can consciously realize. Every moment, the brain receives an overwhelming flood of sensory data. Sounds, movements, facial expressions, subtle emotional shifts. Most of this never reaches conscious awareness. Yet, the subconscious mind still records and interprets it. When all those micro signals combine, the result can feel like intuition, a sudden knowing, or even a vision. We call it gut instinct, but it is really the mind recognizing a pattern before the conscious self catches up. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that the brain can predict simple events a fraction of a second before they happen, based on probability and prior experience. It is not magic, it is anticipation. Likewise, in moments of deep focus or emotional connection, people become highly attuned to subtle cues: a shift in tone, an eye movement, a hesitation in breath. These unnoticed details feed intuition, creating the sense of reading someone's thoughts. For some, especially during meditation or altered states of awareness, this process intensifies. The boundaries between inner and outer perception blur, and what is really subconscious patterning can feel like direct revelation. This is where spiritual language and psychological language intertwine. Both describe the same mystery through different lenses. So, perhaps what we label as ESP is not a doorway to another dimension, but a window into the depth of human awareness itself. The mind is vast, and most of it operates beneath the surface. When we tune into that space, whether through calm, stillness, or deep observation, we glimpse just how much intelligence is already inside us. Maybe the true sixth sense is not supernatural at all. It is the quiet intelligence that has been guiding us, all along, whispering through instincts, hunches, and dreams, reminding us that not all knowing comes from sight. Meditation brings the idea of the third eye down from myth to experience. When someone sits in stillness long enough, attention begins to shift away from the noise of thought and towards something quieter, more subtle. In that silence, many describe a feeling of seeing within, as if awareness itself starts to glow. This is often mistaken for mystical vision, but it may simply be what happens when the mind stops chasing and starts observing. The traditions that speak of the third eye describe it as the gateway to clarity. In yoga and mindfulness practice, the point between the eyebrows is seen as a center of intuition. When focus rests there, breathing slows, thoughts loosen, and a sense of spacious perception opens. What follows is not a flash of light or a new sense, but a heightened understanding, seeing things as they are, without distortion. That is the deeper meaning behind the phrase, opening the third eye, not discovering new worlds, but waking up to the one we already live in. Modern science gives this a psychological frame. Meditation alters brain activity, particularly in regions linked to awareness, emotion, and self-control. It quiets the limbic system, strengthens the prefrontal cortex, and increases connectivity between them. The result? A steadier, clearer form of attention that feels like looking through a cleaner lens. It is not mystical energy. It is the biology of calm focus. Yet, the poetic image of an inner eye endures because it captures something real. During deep meditation, perception can feel less like seeing with the eyes and more like seeing from awareness itself. The boundaries between observer and observed begin to soften. So, when ancient teachers spoke of light within, perhaps they were not describing something supernatural at all, but the mind, illuminated by its own stillness. The third eye, then, is not a new way of seeing the world, but the oldest one, a moment when we stop mistaking our thoughts for truth and simply watch, fully awake, as awareness looks back at itself. The topic of the third eye and extrasensory perception lives in a strange tension between faith and reason. Some people speak of visions, intuitions, and energies with absolute conviction. Others, armed with data and skepticism, dismiss it all as imagination. But somewhere between those two poles lies the more interesting question, not whether it is real, but why we want it to be. Humans have always reached for mystery. When science explains one layer of the world, our curiosity simply moves deeper. The third eye endures because it speaks to something timeless, the longing to believe that life contains more than what can be measured. For believers, it offers purpose, a path toward awakening, a sense that the universe whispers if we learn how to listen. For skeptics, it is a reminder of how imagination and meaning-making can color our perception. Balance comes from holding both views without trying to crush either. The spiritual view invites humility, acknowledging that not everything about consciousness fits neatly into equations. The scientific view invites discipline, reminding us that conviction without evidence can lead to illusion. Together, they form a kind of dialogue. Belief keeps curiosity alive, while skepticism keeps it honest. Even among scientists, the unknown remains vast. We still do not fully understand how thoughts arise, how awareness forms, or why intuition sometimes feels so accurate. To call everything superstition is as limited as to call everything divine truth. The mind's landscape is big enough to hold both wonder and logic. So, perhaps, the healthiest stance is not to prove or disprove the third eye, but to explore it as metaphor, a symbol of our capacity for reflection, insight, and sensitivity. Belief gives the story warmth. Reason gives it structure. Between the two, we might not find a glowing eye hidden in the brain, but we do find something worth keeping, the invitation to keep looking, both inward and outward, with equal curiosity and care. In the end, the mystery of the third eye and extrasensory perception may not rest in hidden powers, but in how deeply we wish to understand ourselves. Whether seen through the lens of spirituality or science, both point toward the same truth. Human awareness is still largely unexplored territory. We stand at the edge of it every day, in the quiet moment, before a thought forms, in the instinct that saves us, in the dream that seems to know more than we do. The third eye, then, can be read as an ancient metaphor for something timeless, the inner light of consciousness. Long before brain scans and psychology, people used story and symbol to describe what could not yet be measured. The sense that perception is more than seeing, that truth exists beneath the surface of things. The mystics turned inward, calling it awakening. The scientists turned outward, calling it inquiry. Both, in their own way, were looking for the same thing, the meeting point between knowledge and wonder. What is remarkable is how those two paths often loop back into each other. Meditation changes the brain in measurable ways. Intuition, once dismissed as superstition, is now studied as subconscious intelligence. Even the pineal gland, once the stuff of legend, remains a tiny biological marvel, proof that our fascination with inner sight is not entirely misplaced. Perhaps, then, the third eye is not about magic or proof. It is about attention. What happens when we learn to look more closely, to listen without noise, to sense the small signals we usually miss? Whether you call that awareness spiritual or psychological does not matter as much as remembering that it is available to everyone. So as this story closes, it leaves a quiet thought behind. Maybe the real vision we seek is not hidden in another realm at all. Maybe it is right here, in the simple act of noticing, of being awake inside our own lives, seeing the world not as it appears, but as it truly is. And so, the idea of the third eye, whether seen as a spiritual gateway or a poetic symbol, reminds us of one simple truth. Perception is more than sight. It is awareness. It is the quiet space where intuition, memory, and presence meet. The mystics might call it enlightenment. The scientists might call it consciousness. Either way, it is the same journey, an exploration of what it means to truly see. Maybe the third eye does not need to be opened because it was never closed. Maybe it is just been waiting for us to slow down long enough to notice what is already there. The subtle intelligence behind every thought, every feeling, every breath. The power to observe without judgment, to sense without fear, to look inward and find understanding instead of mystery. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with me tonight. If you enjoyed reflecting on this topic, where belief and science gently meet, remember to subscribe, like, or share the video to help others find it too. Until next time, keep your mind open, your heart steady, and your awareness clear. The world always has more to show when we learn to see with the eyes that do not close.